I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby here with Rupert Friend, who stars on Netflix's Anatomy of a Scandal. And Rupert, I read something that made me really laugh, where the headline was where you had said, "Don't worry, I don't like James Whitehouse either." And and so I guess my first question is, when you are confronted with a character like this, when you're going to play a character like this, what do you do? Do you try to put the judgment aside, or is that even possible with a character like James?
Yeah, it's not only what we try to do. I think it's the only way you can do it. And for me, it's what actually made this particular project such an exciting challenge, because as you said, I really found him kind of loathsome. And you know, the temptation is just to say, I'm just going to throw it across the room and find something I like more. But you know, I think there's a huge value in for example, reading news sources from outlets you don't agree with and trying food you don't think you like. And so I'm a big fan of pushing into the fear and the distaste in an area of life and seeing how to explore it. And I think with this one, to have been presented with somebody who you not only don't like, you wouldn't want to hang out with, let alone spend 6 months in their world pretending to be them. You think, well, okay, the challenge here is, does this guy think that he's loathsome? Probably not. Does this guy think he's done anything wrong ever in his life? Possibly not. Does this guy actually think he's a kind of perfect husband, perfect dad, perfect politician? Probably. Even in the light of all of the things that we discover that he's done, I feel like what was so brilliant to me about the writing and what S.J. Clarkson, our wonderful director, lent into so hard was that the penny drop moment for this guy who's 40 happens in front of our eyes. Some of us, you know, I guess we have a comeuppance, if you like, or a sort of penny drop moment, ideally a little earlier than that. But this guy is saying to himself, what would I be questioning? I have got this beautiful family, this wonderful career, plenty of money, my constituents love me. What's the bad? And we all can, you know, recognize figures in positions of power currently or historically who don't see any need to self-examine because life seems to be going very well.
Yeah, there's an expression that we have based on an old country song called rose-colored glasses. And right. That's almost how James sees himself, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And so we can sit on the outside and judge, but we have the benefit of hindsight. We have the concise nature of a TV show. So we're presented with the entire series of events, including the past 20 years in whatever it is, 5.5 hours. And so it's easy for us to judge, but you know, there's an old adage in acting that you mustn't judge the character you're playing. Otherwise I would have been, I don't know how you would do that really. You'd be basically commenting on the work as you were doing it, which would be, I think, quite, it wouldn't work.
Well, and yet at the same time, there has to be an attractive quality to this guy for the audience and his wife to just kind of like give him the benefit of the doubt at first. So was that something that you really wanted to work into him?
Yeah, and in fact, I've petitioned quite hard for a couple of additional scenes because we all felt, you know, Sienna Miller and myself who were creating this family and S.J. Clarkson, that we had to see that this guy was not a monster. He was in many ways was a great dad and was a great husband and a great politician, and he did some bad things, but he wasn't an out and out psychopath. Otherwise, we just have a story of a psychopath who got away with it, and that wasn't our story. And I don't think that's particularly interesting. I also don't think he is a psychopath. I think he's, like many people, a little bit unexamined and possibly a little anachronistic. But so, for example, you know, the scene in Parliament where he gives the sort of funny speech and everyone laughs, that was an addition because I thought, I want to see that if this hadn't happened, he could have been the next big thing in politics. He could have been, you know, a charismatic Clinton-esque figure in British politics. And I wanted to see him with his family, with the kids, being a great dad. You know, the Monopoly scene with the magic trick, you know, going down to the sea and throwing them in and playing with them, and all of that stuff we kind of threw in at the spur of the moment because it just felt like doubly tragic. And also the other thing that we really wanted to set ourselves was, let's see if we can't have the audience for at least the first few episodes being on the fence about it. Because if at the beginning you say this guy is an adulterer, and then we discover, spoiler alert, but has been accused of this heinous crime. If there's no other side to that, then we have a very two-dimensional character, and that wasn't any of our intentions.
And you've got nowhere to go.
And you've got nowhere to go. And whereas it now, as you see, there's this, we build to this moment where she said, his wife, Sophie, says to him, but did you say this thing? And we see James kind of going, maybe, but that was our sexy game. And you're like, it's like the house comes tumbling down and you go, that is so not okay. But up till that point, maybe there's a little room for doubt as to whether he was doing anything knowingly wrong. And I think that ambiguity is where the really interesting stuff in storytelling lies.
Well, what's interesting, I spoke to Michelle Dockery yesterday, and we were talking a lot about the courtroom scenes because, in particularly in television, David E. Kelley is kind of this master of the perfect courtroom drama. And Michelle spoke about, the difficulty in those scenes because of the extent of the dialogue and the way that they were filmed. What was it like from your perspective?
Well, Michelle has a better memory than I do, but it was something like 28 pages or something. And just to give context to people who don't work in this business, in film, you're aiming for about 2.5 pages a day. And in some television that can stretch to 5 or 6. So when it says on the call sheet, the Kate and James's courtroom scene, 28 pages, and the way SJ shot it, because she really wanted the tension to build within the scene. It wasn't as if it was like, do a couple of pages and then we'll cut and turn the camera. No, the entire thing, every single time. So it was like playing tennis, but you've got, Sampras and Agassi in the kind of grudge duel of the century, or nowadays Federer and Nadal, whatever. I was very lucky to have Michelle because she's not only a dear friend, but such a great actor. So to have someone to play with, to bounce off, to keep you buoyed for that entire thing is extraordinary. And I think she had the much harder job because she was the interrogator. So, to constantly be asking somebody why, what happened then, what next, who did you do that with, where? There's no clues as to what you're supposed to say, whereas I'm kind of responding to her. So it was one of the more athletic challenges of the project, but I was super lucky to have Michelle as my scene partner for it.
But there is, I think, I want to know. No, she said pretty much the same thing. She was talking about how, she had to constantly just run it over and over and over again for very much the same reason what you're saying is because you've just got to be the respondent, but she's got to kind of like act like she's coming up with these questions kind of off the fly. But at the same time, James has a challenge. You have a challenge from an acting standpoint because there's moments in there where James begins to kind of suspect that this is the same woman from his past. And so I'm wondering, did you kind of look at that whole scene and kind of like, I would love to see like your annotations of the script for those scenes.
It's a great point, and it's one that, S.J. Clarkson, she's very much like a conductor. She analyzes the script like a piece of music sometimes. And that moment, when James starts to suspect or possibly realize the truth, and then there's this wonderful cat and mouse that is so, I think, one of the gems of the series, which is that he says to her without saying anything, if you continue with this, I will expose you, which renders your entire case null and void because you would then be, not qualified to conduct the case. And so you've got this double or possibly triple layers of subtext going on, and in the public stage. They're not in some kind of bar having it out. They're in the public forum there. So it feels very much like a kind of a game of chess going on underneath. And at one point we did actually sort of explore it as a dance, which we did, in rehearsal, and it was very interesting because there was something. It's almost like you're circling each other. The other thing we were looking at was bullfighting. That kind of, the sort of, when do you make your move? And if I go in too soon, I get gored. But if I go in too late, then I get whatever. So all of that just made for a very thrilling ride, considering there's no explosions or monsters.
Well, and see, now you've got the image of Kate and James in a bar fight. That would just kind of, I think that would be a whole different show that I would pay money to see.
Yeah, and it's sort of like Everything Everywhere All at Once, like sort of slow-mo kind of throwing things. That would be very cool. Maybe there's a spin-off there.
David Kelly's writing, he adapted this novel with the showrunner Melissa James Gibson, and so there's a certain rhythm, I think, to David Kelly's writing. What was your experience working with this particular text?
I've noticed that my feeling about, I don't know, I can't speak for every David E. Kelly script, but certainly this one, is that he does this rather brilliant thing, which I think is Hitchcockian, where he, at a certain point in a scene, will let more people know that there is actually a bomb under the table, but not everybody. So what you then get is this kind of like, okay, you and I know, but we've got to keep this dinner party going. But one of us has got to do something about this bomb. But we've also got to keep this dinner party going. And what it does is it just cranks the tension in a scene. And he's so expert at it that moment normally comes when it's too late to leave the dinner party and it's too soon to dive under the table and do something about it, to stretch the metaphor a little bit. And I just think he's a master of that tension and that build. So for actors, it's great because you're never playing just on one level. You've got kind of the surface that you're playing, you've got your own personal truth, and normally you have a secret as well.
One of the other things that Michelle and I were talking about is, you've got these really high octane scenes, and you're also dealing with this really touchy and difficult subject matter. And yet, from what Michelle told me and what I've read, is that it was actually kind of a light atmosphere on set in terms of, really trying to keep the environment, up a little bit. Why do you think that was important?
I think it's just an absolute necessity to puncture the tension that's happening when the cameras are rolling. It's a little like, so I'm using a lot of metaphors here, I apologize, but
I'm an English teacher. I love metaphors.
Okay, brilliant. And you can explain to your students the difference between metaphors and similes, because that's what I remember from my English classes. But it's like a boxing match, in as much as if a boxer was to stay tense the entire time, they would fatigue 10 times the rate. So the whole and not just boxing, any sport really, anything where you have to be on and then you're off. So to me, the more heightened the tension when the cameras are rolling, the more fun it kind of needs to be in between to keep yourself loose. If you're going to do a 28-page scene I think we did that scene for 3 to 5 days, 14-hour days all day in different directions, obviously. The laughter is a necessary release. And we formed a bond. It might sound strange if you don't know any of us socially, but between Sienna, Michelle, Naomi, SJ, and myself, that was one of the more ridiculous and enjoyable and silly, farcical, funny, wonderful kind of gang of goofs, really. And I'm talking like scatological humor in between, just to and then back in. And everyone was consummate professional, and then a 5-year-old, and then consummate professional, and then a 5-year-old. To me, that's a very joyful way to work.
Well, and especially in some of the scenes, particularly I'm thinking like the flashback scenes, particularly between you and Naomi Scott. I have to imagine that the levity was important, but also really taking those scenes seriously, just because of how intense they are.
Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky, and the industry has benefited enormously from the introduction of intimacy coordinators, which I'm sure you've heard about, which is no different or more complicated than a choreographer or a stunt coordinator. Why we didn't have them before, I don't know. But everyone is so grateful, because you've just met someone, and it's like, we didn't have to do nudity, which was a relief, but you've just met someone, and it's like, take your clothes off. What's your name again? It's weird. It's a weird thing to do. So to have someone saying, here's what we're doing, this is basically a dance, your hand goes here, then your leg goes there, and then you up and down 3 times, and then whatever, it just makes it perfunctory. Then everyone feels safe. When everyone feels safe, they can let go into the acting. But if at any point people feel like, well, hang on a sec, I don't know what's happening, it would be like if we were choreographing a fight and we just said, wing it. And suddenly you're like, well, hang on, whoa, hey, there's a punch coming in there. That's not cool. Whereas if you know I'm going to throw a punch, you can really sell your dodge, or you can take it, or whatever the thing is. So, but it was a workout. Again, we shot that thing, that lift, the elevator stuff in American parlance for 2 days, I think. And Naomi had to basically do pull-ups on something over and over again, and I had to do squats effectively. So by the end of it, there was this very funny picture that SJ took of Naomi and I collapsed on the floor of the elevator. My legs were just jello and her arms were all jello, and we couldn't even get up. And they, had to kind of wheel us out of stage and throw us into a, I don't know, car or something, cold bath.
Oh, ice baths.
I actually am a big fan of ice baths.
You and my sister both. She
really,
they terrify me. But this is such a serious show. But I think it's a show about more than just sexual violence. I think it has so much more to say than just about this. When you try to encapsulate the show, what do you think that the show is about?
Well, I'll paraphrase SJ because she's so intelligent and brilliant on this, and she studied and researched the hell out of this subject before taking it on. But to her, the scandal wasn't just the allegation. The scandal was elite privilege, the scandal of nepotism, the scandal of elitism, and why people who inherit power don't question it, and how dangerous that can be. So if you look at this world, and Sienna would agree that Sophie is not entirely innocent of this particular accusation. She targets this guy in university who is, from a good family and strong and smart, or whatever the qualities are, and says, that's going to be my husband. And then when he does anything wrong from that point on, she looks the other way. And she has that realization in the show, which is a very interesting thing for Sienna to chart through that character. But you see it all the way back to James's mother, that he got away with it. He got away with cheating at Monopoly. He got away with it. He got his position in politics because of the university he went to. He got into the university he went to because of the school he went to. He got into the school he went to probably because his dad went there. So, but at no point does James think that any of that is privilege or luck. As he says in the show, it was all hard work. So he's not considering. It's that classic fallacy when people say, I got here entirely on my own. And there is nobody who can say that. If you don't recognize the collective effort in any particular endeavor, then you're missing something pretty obvious, I think. To answer your question, I think the anatomy is as much a breakdown of that cultural elitism, which is not unique to England. It happens in many places.
Well, and that actually brought up something that I hadn't even thought of, is that, this show could have easily been set in the United States. And yet I think it adds something to it by having it set in the UK.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you'd have to, obviously it's written by an American and a Canadian. You could set it in the US, in Canada, you could set it in Europe, because inherited power is not sort of national specific thing. I think it was an interesting exercise to root it in British politics, particularly as it seems to be more and more topical as the days go on. Even though we made the show a little while ago, as it came out, it was as if we made it right on time. But then I think, well, maybe this kind of show is always right on time, and whatever the country, it's right on time, because we don't live in a meritocracy. We live in a democracy, but there is definitely this other thing where it's sort of neither democratic nor meritocratic. It's well, in Britain it's aristocratic, or it's autocratic.
Or oligarchic.
Or oligarchic, exactly. Yeah, we could get to that, but there's definitely that kind of House of Lords oligarchy thing is very, akin. And while America purports not to have a class system, I beg to differ on that one. They just have different names for it.
And that's a topic for a whole different discussion.
In class, we will revisit that next lesson.
Yeah. Everybody go to girlsderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders throughout the season. Rupert Friend, Great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.